So good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. As I said, it's a very warm welcome to you all here at the UK Pavilion this morning. My name's Debbie Palmer. I'm the Director for Energy, Climate and Environment at the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here today for this event, looking at gender equality within just transition policies. And this is an incredibly important issue as we move into the energy transition and think about what sort of world we want and what sort of opportunities we're going to bring for workforces around the world. We have a great panel with us this morning who I'm looking forward to introducing as we go through the event. But first of all, I'd like to welcome the Right Honourable Annalise Dodds, our Minister for International Development and Equalities, who's going to come and give us some opening remarks. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much indeed, Debbie. And I was just remarking that this process is a bit like a rather strange silent disco, less dancing, but hopefully far more purposeful. I'm really delighted to be here, and I want to thank powerful women as well, celebrating a decade of action towards their aim of getting to 40% representation of women in middle management and leadership positions by 2030. And also, of course, the new CEM award that gives this work the global recognition that it deserves. I'm really proud of the long-term partnership that the UK government has had with powerful women as part of this right across the energy industry. And very grateful, as I said, to Debbie Palmer, our Director for Energy, Climate and Environment, who's chairing this event as we work to galvanise global action, including through the Equality and Energy Transitions Initiative and the Equal by 30 campaign, to which we're signatories. It's really clear, and I know you all know this because you're here, that we have to be working together to do more. We have to do more to close the pay gap, to improve female representation in senior roles and indeed in junior roles, and to widen opportunity for women in the global clean energy sector by 2030. The Global Alliance for Green Gender Action will help us to get there, but the need is clearly very urgent, and both at home and globally, I wish we didn't still have to keep making the moral and economic argument for putting women and girls at the heart of the debate for achieving net zero. But clearly we do, because our voices, sadly, are still being ignored on this. So often it is women and girls who are bearing the brunt of the impacts of the climate crisis, women and girls who are being impacted by conflicts that's related to the climate crisis, who are being displaced. I've seen that myself as a new development minister, including, for example, in South Sudan, where it's women and girls who are unfortunately unsafe when they're being driven further and further away from their homes just to collect firewood, for example. It ultimately is those women who are often at the forefront of the impact, but so often also it's women and girls who are cut out of the solutions that we need to be crafting right now. We know that women and girls have the potential to lift up whole families, communities and countries, and to help us make progress, obviously on education, on peace, on prosperity, and the reason why we are here on achieving net zero and dealing with the nature crisis. And again, I've seen that for myself time and again as a new development minister. I saw it, for example, in Indonesia with the women forest rangers that I met. They're doing an incredible job to create prosperity and to combat the nature crisis. I saw it in some of the work of PIDGE in the UK, employing women in Pakistan to renew the electricity system there and doing so very effectively. Alongside all the challenges, we know that opportunities here are immense. At a time when globally, less than a quarter of jobs in energy are filled by women, and when 40 million more jobs are set to be created by mid-century. And when we know that welcoming more women into the workforce generally and ensuring that we're paid the same as men could boost annual GDP by about 20% overall. And to be honest, I am sick personally of hearing that there is a skills shortage in this area. In so many different countries, there is a skills shortage because girls are not being encouraged into learning the skills that are needed for the transition. We need to take responsibility for this and act on it. This isn't just the right thing to do, It's the smart thing to do as well. It's why we're all here. We've got some incredible champions of this agenda, including people who've been working on it for many, many years. We need to move forward much more quickly together. And just as we see action against the climate and nature crisis being too slow, progress on including 51% of the population in the transition is also too slow. Let's make the most of the time that we have together in Baku to accelerate that progress, and that will help women, help whole societies, and of course help our planet as well. So really looking forward to this discussion. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I think you can all hear the passion with which the Minister spoke and how close this is to the Minister's heart. And the stats really speak for themselves, don't they? You know, women's participation in the energy sector is around 20%. The Minister talked about the rapid transition and the changes which are coming and the opportunities that will come with that energy transition. That stat around 40 million potentially new jobs by 2050 is an extraordinary opportunity. And of course, we know we've got the data that equity, diversity and inclusion will make us better. It will drive innovation, it will help achieve societal buy-in. So there's lots of reasons why we really should be caring about this and we should be impatient for much, much stronger action. So I really look forward to hearing from other panel members as we go through. And if I may, first of all, I want to introduce Nick Waith, who is the CEO of the Energy Institute UK, 22 years of experience in BP, so you really know the energy sector inside out. And of course, Nick, you're also a board member for Powerful Women. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about Powerful Women and some of the data that you've been collecting, which will help us continue making the case and drive action.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, and a really powerful welcome from the Minister, and thank you for your support to Powerful Women. It's really great to be back at COP. This is the 4th consecutive year we've done this event. I was on 3 of them in Dubai, in Glasgow, and now today. So a little bit of context first about Powerful Women. First of all, one of the things I'm most proud about the Energy Institute is we are the home of Powerful Women. Powerful Women celebrated its 10th anniversary this year. It was formed in 2014 by Laura Sands and Baroness Sandy Verma. And it was a realization that when, as Energy Minister, Sandy went into pretty much every meeting she went to, she was the only female that really spurred the conversation to say, this is not right, something needs to change. So 10 years of history, and the 3 things that Powerful Women does is, number 1, we've been supporting the sector. We work with 15 of the UK's largest energy companies at CEO or UK country head level, the regulators Ofgem and the North Sea Transition Authority through the Energy Leaders Coalition to really practically help the industry on this journey of ensuring we reach gender parity. Secondly, we challenge the sector. We have been collating data, which I'll show you in a moment, all the way back to 2015. We've been tracking the data with a forensic microscope in terms of how we are progressing, and I'll share more on that. But we use that data to challenge the industry, to challenge the companies, to challenge government, to challenge ourselves in terms of the progress we're making. And finally, we connect. We connect females and men across the industry through our conferences. We just held our annual conference last week in London. Through our ambassador program, it's great to see some of our ambassadors here in the audience with us. And really, I guess, ultimately, the mission we have is to put ourselves out of business, because we hope that one day Powerful Women will no longer be required, because we'll reach that magical target of parity. So let me briefly give you a little overview of some of the numbers, some of which have already been mentioned. So look, when we started collecting this data, and these data are collected from the UK's 80 largest energy companies each year. We've been working with Bain to publish them. We publish them each May, so we'll update them next year in May. And you can see, on the one hand, we've had some quite strong progress. So when we started this journey, women at board level on energy companies represented 9%. We've seen that move through to 29%, so more than tripling over this decade period. And you can see that at senior levels, 34%, and at middle management levels. And those middle management numbers are really important because one of the things we've tracked is a real drop-off in females at those middle management, kind of going through that period where many women go through sort of having families. And so one of our real focus areas over the last 2 years is really around that middle management and how we retain people, females, in that period. But on our journey towards 40%, and by the way, in my view, 40% is not the right target. It should be 51%. But putting that aside, we are making progress. But the thing I want to really draw your attention to, and I find this number so depressing because it really is there every year, it doesn't really change, is that 20%. It's really hard to believe and understand as we approach 2025 that 20% of the UK's energy companies still don't have a single female on their board. I cannot imagine working for an organisation that has 0 females on its board. My own board is 60% female, but to have a board which has 0 females in 2024 is frankly astonishing. All the data are there for you to look at and download, and we'll be updating this in May. But really, just in terms of context, I'll leave it there and pass back to you, Debbie.
Thanks very much, Nick. You've painted a very powerful picture of where we stand at the moment. And if I may, I'm going to turn now to Angelos Pastras. Angelos is a senior consultant and project manager in the UK energy storage industry at DMV. But Angelos is also, really crucially, the leader of the Youth Action Group of the Commonwealth Sustainable Energy Transition. And amongst lots of other roles and accolades. And Angelos is also a really passionate climate advocate. I think this is your 4th COP now. So I'd really like to hear from you, Angelos, and your perspective on, so why does this matter? Why does it need to be mainstreamed? And what have you been observing in the sort of conversations that you've been having?
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay, amazing. It's great to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me, and it's a privilege and an honor to be representing the youth of the Commonwealth, male and female as well. I think from my experience, the energy transition is not just a technological challenge, it's also a social and economic revolution that needs to happen across the board. And that obviously has a lot of friction with regards to changing systemic and cultural norms that might be hindering gender equality in many different ways. Within CSET Youth, the Commonwealth Sustainable Energy Transition Youth, we've identified 2 main barriers with regards to gender equality and the energy transition. The first one is awareness. Oftentimes, young girls don't know that STEM subjects are a plausible career path for them. I worked as a STEM ambassador in the UK, in Greater London, as well as the North, going to schools and talking about what is an engineer, what do we do professionally. And it was evident that especially young girls didn't know that was an option for them. They had certain examples in the head of what they could be when they grew older in life, and those were not engineering jobs, they were not energy transition or climate-related careers. So that is number one. I think awareness, and we're talking about this with Minister Dodds earlier, creating the awareness is oftentimes enough for young people to actually drive the change themselves. So that's number one. And number two, and I'm sure we can go into more detail later, is empowerment. A lot of young people, even though they might be aware of the possibilities, they don't have the tools to actually act upon them and drive this change that I just mentioned. So capacity building and skills transfer and teaching young girls the technical skills that are needed to be part of the energy transition, a catalytic part, to say the least, is the second key priority that we have as CSET Youth going forward. So I think I'll leave it there for now, and I'm sure there's going to be more.
Super, Angelos. Thank you so much for beginning to paint the picture of how life looks for girls across the UK. I'm going to turn to Sophie now, if I may. Sophie Westlake leads the UK government's International Energy Unit. She drives forward our multilateral energy diplomacy, heading on negotiations at the G7 and the G20. And crucially, Sophie also acts as the chair of the Gender Advisory Council for the International Energy Agency. So Sophie, you spend a lot of time thinking about these issues issues as well. Could you tell us why you think gender, equity, diversity, inclusion are so crucial, and what are you hearing in those negotiations? What are you hearing in the international environment?
Yeah, thank you so much. And again, a pleasure to be here and be part of this discussion. I partake in a lot of discussions where we talk a lot about gender and how we improve gender representation across especially public administration. And I'll come on to a bit of that later. But actually what I wanted to talk about was more the Clean Power mission in the UK, which, as many of you will know, we've set really ambitious targets to reach clean power by 2030. And the opportunity that creates in terms of the workforce is enormous. I mean, it also creates clearly a huge challenge. And I think we know that something like 720,000 new jobs are going to be needed each year. I think that's actually an old stat that hasn't been updated since we increased ambition. But it's such an enormous target that I think in terms of, you know, if we are to achieve that, it is absolutely imperative that we get the gender process right, because otherwise we're just accessing sort of half of the talent of the country, which makes no sense whatsoever. So just to build on that a little bit more in terms of what's needed, in the offshore wind sector, we need to triple the number of workers currently working there. We talk a lot about the challenge of tripling capacity, but we don't talk that much about the number of people that implies that need to be involved in the sector. Just to put out a few other statistics, it's something like 32,000 engineers are needed, 29,000 electrical traders, 25,000 mechanical traders, 15,000 welders. There's actually a brilliant initiative in the US, which is about women welders, kind of training each other, and the program that's been supported by the government. And I think it's that kind of creativity that we're going to need across the piece in order to get women into these jobs. And I think the issue is that we are also kind of entering in terms of like communications across the population. We're more siloed. And I feel like, I mean, we're actually going to talk about AI in the next event, and the sort of the algorithms in all the platforms that we're on. I go on Instagram and I'm just bombarded with makeup adverts or inspiring stories about women who've started businesses in hair products. And I talk to women and girls who are younger and thinking about their careers, and that's exactly their experience as well. And so I think as part of this Clean Power mission, we're going to have a workforce strategy that's going to be absolutely essential. But as part of that, I'm really quite excited about the opportunity for us to sit down and really think about, okay, how do we target women to enter the sector? And that's not just young women in terms of training, but it's also thinking about reskilling other people across the sector. So yeah, that's I think a bit of a huge challenge, but massive opportunity as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sophie. So you talked about reskilling, and I'd like to turn now to Rachel McEwen, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at SSE. And SSE is obviously a leading generator of renewables and flexible energy across both the UK and Ireland markets, and also one of the fastest growing electricity network companies. Rachel, I know you're also sitting as a commissioner in the Scottish Government's Just Transition Commission. But within SSE, you've been a powerhouse for driving forward some of this work over recent years, and I know it hasn't always been straightforward. We'd love to hear a little bit about your experience and actually what does it take, and actually what are the bumps in the road in order to drive us forward through this process.
Brilliant, thanks very much, and thanks very much for inviting us to be here. I suppose I just want to pick up on the context, which is what you just talked about, the Clean Power mission, which is absolutely, overwhelmingly, fantastically exciting. So I can't emphasise that enough. And for us as a Scottish headquartered electric utility, we've got a £40 billion investment programme. Half of that is in transmission circuits in the north of Scotland. So the scale of this is just jaw-dropping. And my little corner of the world, the north of Scotland, we reckon we're going to need 5,000 people on sites in 2027. And this is in a part of the country that's got, 4 or 5% of the population of the UK. So we are going to need an awful lot of humans, okay? Now, to give us our best chance of getting sufficient numbers of humans, obviously we need to be much, much more inclusive and diverse in the people that we're attracting. So that's the context. But even without that context, if we weren't growing, is there an imperative to change this industry to make it more reflective of the communities we serve? Particularly because we're an industry, it's like, I don't know how to put this, it's like we're something that we need, not what we want, okay? That means there's a public good, a public interest. That means we need to represent the communities that we serve. Now, you're also right that we've been on a long journey on this, and we've got some of the scars on our backs from some of the things that we've disclosed. I'm sure we'll talk about how we go about this in a second, but the thing I want to say is we need to be strategic here, not tactical. So you can always get asked what's the best thing you've ever done to bring about more diversity. If I was to say what the best thing that we've done is about transparency, and if I can get my slide up, if there's a button. Yay. This is just these are just screenshots of some of the data that we have been disclosing. Now, SSE was the first company to disclose against the gender pay gap the year before we were required to. That made us the first company to disclose. We had to take some brave pills to do that because wasn't flattering, and it still isn't particularly flattering. It's not equal. But what you can see in that graph is that looks to me like a trend. So all these years that we've been doing it, I've been nervous. But are we actually going to crack this? You know, we know from history and from all the other data points that actually cracking the gender pay gap, it is persistent. It sticks there. You know, we are decades away from fixing this properly at a country level. But actually, what I'm seeing there is the emergence of a trend. And you can see that slowly, bit by bit, both the gender pay gap and the bonus pay gap, the way the rules are, you've got to get quite technical and detailed, it is starting to come down. But what happened when we first published that, there was lack of understanding around what it meant, the gender pay gap. It's not the same as two lawyers, a man and a woman getting paid differently. That's against the law and has been for quite a long time, rightly so. This is obviously at an enterprise level. So that, and then you can see the other things I've just put snapshots up there, is you need to get really detailed on exactly what you're chasing, your leadership levels, your middle management levels, all of these sorts of things, because that's what holds you to account.
Super. Rachel, thank you. You're starting to enrich the picture, and we're getting down and dirty into the machine of how we're going to do this. And just to say, Minister, if at any point you'd like to come back in, just give me a wave, and of course we'll make opportunity for you to do that. But I want to move on now. As I said, we're starting to get into the question of how. And actually, what are the mechanics? What are the things we need to do? What are the trade-offs? What are the challenges? What do we need to be saying and doing? And so I'd love to hear from all of you as a panel in terms of what difference does this step change make to you as a company or organisation in delivering the energy transition, but what are the actions that you think are needed? So what one action do you want to really spotlight today? We've heard about middle management, we've heard about the boardrooms, we've heard a little bit about training for young women and inspiring them and giving them the vision. But can you tell us a little bit about what you think are the things mechanically we should be doing? And I'd love to hear from each of you. Nick, can I turn to you first?
So, well, we've heard all the stats. And I think, this is absolutely critical. I think one element we haven't talked about is the importance of this sector representing the communities in which it operates. Because a huge about this transition is going to involve communities. It's been oft quoted, there's no transition without transmission. Well, all of those cables, those pylons, those wind turbines need to end up in somebody's community. And so community engagement has got to be a huge part of this transition. And frankly, if we have an energy sector which is made up of middle-aged white guys like me, that doesn't really represent many societies around the world. So there is this really critical point around really genuinely representing the societies we operate in across every level. I also think there's some really practical steps. I mean, it was kind of staggering. I was at an Energy Leaders Coalition meeting last year. So this is the 15 largest UK energy companies. SSE is one of those companies, the regulators. And one of the chief executives, it wasn't your company, Rachel, said, with a sort of, I guess, an equal mix of pride and embarrassment, well, we've just introduced female uniforms for our technician staff. And so through all of time, up until that point, females, technicians, be they servicing boilers or heat pumps, had worn a men's size small outfit. I mean, it's kind of staggering, isn't it? It's kind of staggering. I mean, my sort of somewhat flippant, but, sort of flip of this is, can you imagine British Airways insisting that, throughout time, the male cabin crew had worn female uniforms? You just can't. And yet, the energy sector, through the last century, has given females small male outfits. So I think there's the really practical elements, and there's so much more. I talked about middle management before. We've picked up through our research huge challenges with how women navigate that period in middle management. One of the real insights is that culturally there's a huge way to go in terms of just the environments in which we have in many of our energy organizations. So a huge amount more to be done on that. But I guess to answer your sort of thing, I'm going to be greedy here. I'm going to have one with my Powerful Women hat, one with my Energy Institute hat, and one third one. So I'm being very greedy. I think number one, be bold. The only target can be 50%. Our 40% target is a near-term target, but be bold with the ambition. We have to be. Be open to learning and collaboration. This is not easy. There are often challenges. There are often many sort of pitfalls around this agenda. One of the real powers of the Energy Leaders Coalition is creating a safe space where people can ask the difficult, naive questions. And lastly, it's really important we engage the majority while spotlighting the minority. It's brilliant that you're all here today. One of the real challenges, and the same is true of our conference last week, is it tends to be those who are already on the pitch that engage in this. We need to find a way to engage those who aren't on the pitch, the sort of silent majority, people like me, who have spent a long time in the sector, and so it's always really encouraging, as well as the supportive females on this agenda, to see supportive males turning up to these events. So I'll leave it there.
Super, Nick. Thank you. You've painted such a powerful picture, and your analogy about the women's uniform, I have to say, it reminds me of a different sector that I worked in once, where there were no female toilets or female showers. We were given 15 minutes in the morning where the women were allowed to use the men's, and that's how it works. So there's something about how do you begin that process of reimagining and rethinking and fitting for the future the vision of everything all the way through the industry. Angelus, can I turn to you? With your Commonwealth perspective, again, the sort of people that you're talking to, what do you think is the change that should be being made? How do we drive this forward? How do we accelerate action?
I think the point around reimagining is very important. Just to remind everybody, SDG 7 around sustainable energy for all doesn't have a gender indicator built into it. We are talking about efficiency and renewable energy and all of these great things. Obviously, we need those to decarbonize, but there's no gender denominator in SDG 7. So I think the work that people such as Sophie, Rachel, yourself, Minister, and Nick is very important, because we have agency to change that at a national and by extension international level, and this is very, very important. I think coming to the Commonwealth, there's a lot of leadership that's being demonstrated by young women. I can give you an easy example. We recently did a compendium with case studies from young people across the Commonwealth around innovative ideas and ways they're tackling the energy transition. And there's a company in Kenya called Bito Energy that have established a distribution system for clean cookware, because women across the Commonwealth and beyond are often the pillars of resilience for households and by extension their local communities. So by providing them the tools they need to have a cleaner home less healthcare need for their children and themselves, they can then also start thinking about the next steps professionally, academically potentially, and in terms of access to a better income and so on. So I think agency with the work such as all of yourselves are doing, and giving the tools and empowerment to these enterprises by young women is very, very important, because they drive change first at a local level, at the grassroots level, let's say, which then trickles up. That's not the right word, but it feeds upwards towards the national determined contributions, the international organizations that we all work with or under, and by extensions to things like the Sustainable Development Goals, the commitments we make at an international UN level. I will just close by saying that I was scrolling through my feed as well this morning, and a snippet on Instagram came from Meryl Streep at the UNGA, and she was talking about women's rights, and she gave this very heartbreaking example that a squirrel at the moment in Afghanistan has more rights than a woman, because women and girls are banned from going to the parks. So, you know, we might be talking about middle-level management and all of these things, but there is so much work to be done at a global level, and we, the UK, among very few countries, need to set the example and the standard as to what others should be aiming towards. So I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Angelos. That's a powerful, if very, very depressing stat, but it really kind of brings home what we're doing. So Sophie, in the multilateral environment, in the UK government, what do you think?
Yeah, thanks very much. And I guess just to return a bit to the theme that Nick was talking about kind of that diversity of thought and how that is what makes the difference. There are actually really strong statistics that back that up. And I mean, I was reading one that apparently research has shown that companies with above average diversity in management achieve 19% higher innovation revenues. So there's plenty of data to back up, you know, the reason why. But in terms of, in terms of how, so one of the things that we've done in the Gender Advisory Council in the IEA has been to share best practice across the countries of what we've done to gender mainstream in departments. And I think one of the things that we do well in the UK is the application of what's known as the public sector equality duty, which many policy officials are just a little bit annoyed that they have to go through this process of every time they put up advice, okay, what does it mean for the public sector equality duty? Oh, nothing is fine. But I have seen that have real impact where people are developing policy and they're suddenly like, oh, I have to do this thing. Oh, I need to do an impact assessment of how my policy is going to impact different groups. And that's the moment where they actually realize, oh, maybe there is an angle I hadn't thought about then, which can be with respect to gender, can also be with respect to different ethnic groups, many different dynamics to the duty. But it's that element that we've shared across with other countries in the IEA, and you find that some countries have versions of that themselves. And I always think, and I've spoken to people in businesses or the third sector and asked, like, do you do something similar? You know, when you're going to make a big business decision, is there a moment where you stop and think, okay, is this going to impact different communities differently? And is there anything I can do to mitigate that? And I think that sort of practice, that is what gender mainstreaming is all about. And if you have an obligation that forces every official or employee to think about that impact with the decisions that they're making, then I think that can be hugely powerful. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Super. Thanks very much, Sophie. Rachel, you talked earlier about taking brave pills, which is a really nice way of putting it. But I wondered if you could tell us a little about what it took to get SSE's board to take that step and move forward into transparency. You also talked about the fact that you can't just do this once. This is an ongoing process. So how is it that the culture change is happening to really stick with this process and really sort of continue the daily grind of not sort of sliding, as Sophie said, some of these things are a bit of a chore, frankly. Not everybody wants to do them. So how is it that you maintain that sort of momentum and maintain that cultural commitment to this task? Thanks.
Okay, I'll start with the latter part. So I kind of said earlier how important it is to be strategic and not just tactical. And I would describe the strategy that we've got for inclusion and diversity, that we've kind of we've got a phrase that is about focusing on in, on and up. So in is about getting more people of difference into the company. On is about hanging on to them, because sometimes they can leave or whatever, and we need to understand more about that. And then, of course, up is about the way that they get up. Now, in terms of the actions that fit underneath that strategy, there are dozens and dozens, maybe even hundreds. So to give you a sense on in, so if you are if you're a manager in SSE, you are not allowed to recruit unless you have gone through inclusion training. So that training around language and all those sorts of things, that's very powerful. So if you're a middle manager or any sort of manager, you cannot recruit anybody unless you've done this training. So there's little things like that, which is a bit sticky, if as opposed to carroty, but it gives you a sense. Now, then on so it's things like classic stuff like family friendly, but actually it's also about understanding why are people leaving when they're leaving, to really understand and do something about that. And then, of course, up is about the talent schemes, but it's also about the diversity that's within those talent schemes. Now, so that gives you a sense, generally speaking, of the types of things that we do. But your question was how do you make this stick culturally, and was there a challenge with the board? I would say that there was never a point where there was a few of us going, dear board, will you support more inclusion and diversity? It was never like that. Okay, that's not the type of company we are. This is the whole of the organisation understanding what it needs in the UK. 2 weeks ago, we launched a sustainable RCF, so it's basically like a big overdraft facility, and it's a sustainable RCF. Now, what that means is that we've got KPIs that are attached to our debt. Now, for the first time, we have put social KPIs in that debt. We've always had green carbon. Almost by definition, if it's a green bond, it's about carbon. But this time we've put in 2 social KPIs. One of them is a gender one, and it is on. You won't see it on the slide, but basically that middle management, it's actually leadership position. So the top 5-10% of the company is about a cohort of about 1,200. Currently, we're on 27% are female. We are targeting 40% by 2030, and we've aligned that to sustainable debt. So you can see what we're trying to do here. We're trying to institutionalize it, bake it in. This makes it harder to unpick if that was anybody's want, but I don't think it is. But it also keeps you properly focused on it.
Super, Rachel, thank you. We're starting, as I said, to really paint the picture of how this looks. And just to let colleagues in the audience know, I'd like to come to you in a few minutes to hear a bit about your views on sort of what you think we should be doing, where you can drive inspiration from. But Nick, if I may first, and forgive me if I ever so slightly put you on the spot, but Rachel talked about the why. So why is it that, how is it we get women in? But also then what's keeping them in or what's driving them out? You've got a fantastic data set through Powerful Women. And I just wondered if underneath that headline data you presented to us, you've got any more instincts about the why and the sort of what is it that determines whether women stay or whether women go, and whether you've got any reflections on that.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point around, and it comes back, I've said it twice already, but I'll say it a third time. It's around, around that middle management point. You can see from the data that, and at the board level, we've made strong progress. Leadership, it's interesting that leadership is slightly ahead of middle management. And when we did this piece of research about 2 years ago, where we went out and we interviewed women at that stage of their careers, the sort of feedback we got, the stories that came out, and this was, this wasn't sort of companies over there. This was companies like SSE, like National Grid, like Centrica. Was that the lived experience of those females was not what it said on the website or on the tin. The request for flexible working, whilst it might be enshrined in a policy, was really dependent on what an individual line manager thought was okay. And in many instances, that wasn't okay. the sort of the culture around sort of the boys club, it still persisted. Maybe not in the obvious way it might have done historically, but there was still a sort of a culture that made it difficult for those women at that middle management stage to kind of continue through to the most senior levels. And it was sort of interesting because we reviewed this with those CEOs around the table, and guys, this is you, this is your companies, this is the culture that exists in the companies. And I think the things that Rachel has described is you need to enshrine these things in a way that they can't be taken away. And I think once you start building this into the terms of green finance, you can't back away because you're not then meeting your loan criteria. So I think there's still a deep underlying cultural point that needs to be worked through. I think there's an element within that still exists around the sort of Me Too aspects, but a lot of it is far more subtle than that. It's far more subtle in terms of the sort of behaviours that are being exhibited in the day-to-day of these organisations.
Super, thanks, Nick. So we've got to the culture point, which is always, such a difficult nut to crack, but is at the heart of so many of these things. And it's absolutely crucial that we're therefore thinking about how we drive things forward. So, Angelos, I just wonder if you want to reflect on that culture point and reflect on, again, sort of what's happening in the international landscape, different experiences of how we move things forward.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Minister. There's a lot to be said about culture as a barrier for gender equality. I think we talked about this labor force and skill sets and upskilling, reskilling, all of these things. But in many communities, even if you were to train women to become solar engineers, wind engineers, grid engineers, etc., they would still not be able to leave their home during the day to go work on a solar farm that's being built somewhere in the countryside, let's just say. And that's because of all of the other responsibilities that come from being a mother or being, that head of the household that I described earlier. So I think this is another challenge that we need to overcome culturally across the globe. And like I said, I believe it's our leadership as the UK, as these big companies like SSE that are setting the standards for advisory boards, for professional opportunities and getting women a decent salary that can help them afford being away from the household, an X amount of time to work on something that they're passionate about. So that's one thing. I also wanted to briefly touch on access to energy, which is still a big problem across the globe. The latest numbers, if I'm not mistaken, is that around 8% of the global population still doesn't have access to electricity, and that's a major problem. It primarily impacts women as well, because as soon as the sun goes down, the lights go out, you cannot study for school or university or whatever it is that you aspire to be, which then hinders your prospects for professionally and personally and so on. So I think that conversation, even though it's been consistently improving over the years, 2 years ago it was at 10% of the global population, around 800 million people without access to electricity, the majority of which in sub-Saharan Africa. That's improved to around 600 to 700 million now, but it's still 600 million people without access to electricity. And I think the impact of that on women is significant, and is something that we must not forget.
Yeah, super. Thanks, Angelos. So we're going to move to the last part of our conversation this morning, and this is about looking towards the future. Here we are at COP29. Next year we'll be back at COP30. As somebody said in a seminar I was in yesterday, there have been 29 COPs. Let's just pause on that for a minute. There have been 29 COPs, and here we are still. The need for urgent action has never been clearer across the climate space, but also, as we can hear, in terms of how we are creating the sort of just societies, the sort of just economies that are going to be needed in the future, not just to drive economic growth, to ensure that we've got cleaner and greener growth, but also to ensure that we've got the right sort of societal transition, the right sort of industries that are reflecting the societies they come from in an equitable way. So as we think towards the future and we think towards the coming months, can I ask if anybody in the audience would like to come in? You're very, very welcome, but I'm also going to ask our panel, where do you get inspiration from so that when we return next year in Brazil, that we've actually made a step change. So that we're not having the same conversation next year, but we're coming back having taken a fresh step, having driven things into the sort of, be it the green finance, be it the public sector equality duty, how are we creating the levers and the broader culture, which sometimes is a bit softer, as you said, when you look around the board, this is your culture. This is, we are all part of creating that culture. So as I said, if anybody in the audience would like to come in, you're very, very welcome to. But I'll keep working with colleagues in the panel to hear. Sophie, can we hear a little bit from you about, where do you get the inspiration from? How are we going to keep making this step change?
Yeah, thank you. So I think what I find really encouraging is where progress has been made, and we're seeing that change start to take place. And actually, your graph showing the descending line is a good illustration of that. I was going to point to, we've known in the UK for a long time that getting more women and girls into STEM subjects has been a real challenge. But by focusing on that and implementing various programs, we have seen some progress. So, for example, in A-levels, girls taking at least one A-level that is a STEM subject has gone from 32% in 2009 to 40% in 2021, so that's a decent step up. And similarly, in undergraduate STEM studies, we've gone from 33% in 2010 to 42% in 2021. So we are seeing that those programs are helping. So that's, I think, really encouraging. And then, similarly, when we discuss in the IEA, as part of this Gender Advisory Council, we've noted that in 2010, 90% of members of the IEA were reporting that their departments were broadly male-dominated. So, well, at least more, substantially more men than women. And that has changed from 2010. So now in 2024, it's less than 50% of those members are reporting that. So, that is really encouraging that the picture does seem to be changing. In terms of just general inspiration, I do a number of these kind of discussions, and I'm always really impressed when, I suppose it's something about being in the public sector, you're always really impressed by other people in the private sector doing like really technical jobs. And I think, the work of powerful women in having those ambassadors that are going out to companies and getting those speakers in to encourage women in more junior and middle management positions to kind of aim high. And I think those are sort of things that we need to keep doing. We need to keep talking about it. Thanks.
Super. Thanks, Sophie. Rachel, can I come to you? What gives you the inspiration as you keep driving forward this progress?
So I think I might go slightly broader on the climate agenda, but it's sort of linked. The thing that I absolutely love about working for a private company is that it's about practical action. And there's so much agency and empowerment in doing stuff. So in this world, whether it's gender or all the things that we want to change about the world, there's a sort of conflict between hope and fear. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes you're kind of, oh my God, there's so much to do and that's horrendous. And then there's, oh my God, there's so much to do, that's fantastic. You know what I mean? And the thing that's wonderful about working for a company like SSE is that we get practical. So all these targets, I always say targets, whether the carbon ones or gender ones, they are simply action in theory. They're not yet action in practice. And when you get to work for a company like SSE, you get to do the things in practice. And I think that the practical experience of that can be, and you have to be careful because you can't just pump sunshine, you have to do warts and all. But it can be quite helpful for building confidence. I'm going to, again, go slightly off beam, but you mentioned at the beginning I'm involved in something called the Just Transition Commission in Scotland, and SSE has a Just Transition strategy. It's a labour of love. It's something we've been championing for some time. And one of the things that we publish is the number of people that we attract from former high carbon industries. So we're obviously low carbon industry now, and that's a bit of a euphemism for oil and gas. And of the 3,200 people that we recruited last year, 38% of them were from high carbon industries. Now, the reason we say that is because there's a double function to that. One, there's keeping us to account and saying this is important, we want to attract people from the high carbon industries. But actually there's a second thing, because it's saying to the high carbon industries, there is another route, there is another life, there is another pathway. So these this confidence building examples, I think, are super important, which is why we like to talk about it, but always with warts and all. We don't just pump sunshine.
Thank you very much. We don't want any sunshine, too much sunshine this morning. We want a down and dirty practical discussion. Thank you. So Angelos, can I come to you for the final time? Where will you get your inspiration from? How are you keeping going?
I think that's an easy one to answer because it's all of you and the work you do and everybody here with us. You said, Sophie, we need to keep talking about it. We do. That's the most important thing. And that applies not just to the gender conversation, but also the decarbonization and just energy transition conversation. It's very important to be talking about a just energy transition, adjust whatever the agenda might be, because that means we shouldn't be leaving anybody behind. And that is the core principle, for me at least, of all of these conversations at COP. We've had 29 of these. We're still talking about the same problems at different scales, of course. A lot of things have been improved, but there's still optimism and hope and a lot to be done, which I think is very good, challenging, but good in its core. I'll close by saying last year I had the honor to participate in a roundtable with the Assistant Secretary General for Climate of the UN, Selwyn Hart, and we had this same conversation as to how do you keep going at it, what keeps you inspired? And his answer was, it's the first time that the world is talking about these problems at this sort of level and seriously. We knew fossil fuel and the oil and gas sector was a problem. We knew there were issues in the gender space, but it's the first time now that we are actually here doing things, putting policy in place to try and overcome all of these challenges. So I think this in and of itself is very inspiring. It's hopeful, it's a good message to have and a good message to the world as to where we want to go.
Super, Angelos, thank you. Before we close, we've got an intervention from the floor, which I'm delighted to hear. Let me get you a mic.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I found this conversation so interesting, so thank you so much. As someone who's relatively early in my career, sadly I can't quite say early anymore, I find it really interesting when you talk about inspiration point, and I don't want to sound fickle here, but I do think it's quite an important point, and it comes back to the culture of allowing women in the workspace, particularly in this sector as well, when it's such a particular workspace, to kind of be themselves and create a new form of culture. So I think it's really easy, and I've seen it in myself when I was younger and younger generations coming through, to feel like you need to be taken seriously, which is a fair point, but then you often associate the need to be taken seriously with dressing like a man, be like a man, or like how we perceive typical male traits, I suppose. And just yesterday, I was really inspired by a young negotiator in the British team, I won't name them, but she presented herself just really confidently, and she dressed how she wanted, and she looked how she wanted. And I found that myself really inspiring to see, and was like really pleased to see that. And I know no one woman is the same. Everyone presents themselves differently. But like, I, for example, love seeing women embracing their femininity when they're also in a really serious environment. Like, we had some incredible speakers yesterday. So I found that really refreshing at COP to see that they're helping to kind of change that culture by carving out space that's not maybe a homogenous, traditional male, typical male experience. But yeah, sorry, I know that's too much.
Thank you so much. No, that's really wonderful, and I think it's a great segue. I think we've got time just for maybe one minute more from the front row, John, if you could hand over a mic.
Hi, thank you. I'm Francesca Rhodes from Care International UK. We have a programme of work on making the green economy work for women, so it's really great to hear this discussion. And one thing that's really inspiring, I think, is a conversation happening at COP amongst women's rights organisations and feminists around the role of care work in the future green economy. And we've discussed it a bit today, as this real barrier for women's equality. And of course, it is often kind of cultural, social. That's true kind of in the UK. When my daughter's sick at nursery, they call me, not her dad. But there's also a real need to invest in the services that support care work, so in childcare, in the global south, that might look like, water access, etc. So I think, that's part of the conversation as well, is around making the case for investments in that care economy for being a really key part of the green economy that we want in the future.
Super. Thanks, Francesca. So, Nick, I think everyone's teed you up very well. If you can grab a mic, or I can get your mic back, to talk a little bit about sort of, powerful women seems to be very much sort of one of the emblematic examples of what colleagues have been talking about. Over to you.
Well, I was just going to, come back to this point of inspiration. I think I'm personally inspired by the progress. I'm going to burst your bubble there, Debbie. We will be having the same conversation next year, I'm really sorry to say. But we should take solace in the progress we are making. But to me, and it was really interesting to hear about the sort of, to me it's a question of role models. Yeah. And if I mention BP, Shell, ExxonMobil, Equinor, SSE, Centrica, do you know what all these companies got in common? Not one of them has ever had a female chief executive. Last week in Abu Dhabi, I met the female chief executive of the Ugandan National Oil Company. I can guarantee that young females in Uganda are thinking, wow, that could be me. Without somebody at the top of any of those companies, we're not creating the role models that people see. I'll just give a shout out to Emma Pinchbeck. It's her day 4, I think, as Chief Executive of the Climate Change Committee. A phenomenal role model for women and for men. She dresses how she wants, and very well, I should add. But I think it needs that woman at the top. And I'll just say, it was announced yesterday, there is a role available for the Chief Exec of SSE. So let's really hope and push for a female to maybe step into that role to succeed Alistair, who, by the way, has been a huge supporter of powerful women.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick. So you've heard it here this morning. We're coming to the end of our time, but the jaw-dropping opportunities, the 40 million new jobs that will be entering the sector, and the challenge for us all is, what do we want those jobs to look like? Who do we want to fill those jobs? We've heard about the importance of being strategic and not tactical, of thinking all the way through the sort of the jobs value chain, youth awareness and youth empowerment, middle management, role modeling, what's happening at the board, thinking about the pathway through the organisation, who's coming in, who's staying on, who's getting up, understanding why that's happening, and then finally baking it in and really ensuring that at every step we're baking in the things that will stop us moving backwards. And that's how I think we change the culture. That's how we keep going. That's how we see progress. So even if we're back next year having this conversation, I hope that the stats on those charts are keeping driving forward. And thank you all to our panel for all the work you're doing, not just here this morning, but day by day, the grind of ensuring that we're driving things forward. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning.